Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies, including a year-long series on the films of 1973, looking back at what films looked like then and what they look like today as they celebrate their 50th anniversary. So I've been talking about some more or less obscure movies, but I'm not going to talk about an obscure movie today, for sure, because this is The Exorcist, and this is a film that was based on a best-selling book by William Peter Blatty, directed by William Friedkin, hot off of The French Connection. Three relatively unknown stars in Jason Miller, Ellen Burstyn, Linda Blair. A couple of experienced actors in the supporting cast. Max von Sydow, who's here in silhouette, and also Lee J. Cobb is in here as the homicide detective. So, what was it like in 1971 or 1973? The book came out in 1971, and it was a water cooler book. This was an era where there was, as I mentioned in some of my previous discussions of the films in 1973, based on best-selling novels. And they were a big thing in the 1970s. It seemed like a lot more people read in the early 1970s. And when there was a real page-turner kind of book, a book that would keep you up well into the night that you just couldn't put down, it seemed like everybody was reading it. A couple of years later, the movie appeared. It opened the day after Christmas in 1973, so I would have actually seen it in 1974. But when you read the book and then you're going to see the film, when you read this particular book, you wonder, how can they actually film this? This movie of possession, of demonic possession. Because the person who is being demonically possessed is a 12-year-old girl. How could you possibly do it? There's so many scenes in the book that are full of some of the most obscene language you can imagine anybody saying, no less a 12-year-old girl. And the film got an R rating. I mean, if you know what I mean, especially in 1973, no one had ever seen scenes like this before. And again, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of 1973. So my own reaction, my initial reaction to going to see The Exorcist in that year was, I didn't really like it. I thought it was just too overdone. And it's one thing to read about a 12-year-old girl being possessed in such a demonic and really over-the-top manner. And then another thing to actually see a 12-year-old actress actually having to perform these scenes. And they kept, I mean, they may have toned down a couple of the scenes a little bit, but they kept the language, they kept they kept all the circumstances that, you know, the famous masturbation scene. I thought, no way they're ever going to show that in a movie. So when I saw it, I found that it was certainly an effectively horrifying experience, very disturbing, but I didn't think I'd ever want to see it again. And I don't think I ever did. I don't think I ever saw The Exorcist after its original release. And it did not get great critical praise, and especially amongst the high-profile critics, outside of Roger Ebert. Now, Roger Ebert did give it 4 stars, but when you read his initial review, it doesn't read like a 4-star. He was upset. He admired the technical skill of the filmmakers, but he wondered, this is a pretty ugly movie. But, you know, Pauline Kael, she just scathingly denounced it, and like a lot of people, she wondered what parents would allow their 12-year-old girl to go through this kind of experience. There was hundreds of parents that did, because Friedkin had a very large search for an actress who could play this role. And Pauline Kael wonders if when these parents whose children weren't picked went to see the movie, were they sitting in the theater thinking, oh, if only my daughter could have played this role? Andrew Saris of The Village Voice, Vincent Canby in the New York Times, Janet Maslin, the Boston Globe, San Francisco Examiner, they all pretty much denounced this movie in various terms, that it was indeed an ugly movie, and that it was basically sort of spiritual porn. And the effects were really really amazing. This is in fact a technical feat. No CGI. How did they do it? There is a 30-minute documentary that's included in this Blu-ray that is of the extended director's cut. So this is the 2-hour and 20-minute cut. The original theatrical cut was 2 hours, and Friedkin put it back in. I think in the late 90s or early 2000s, there was a release, a theatrical release of the film. So it is very much an astonishing technical feat. But in the book and in the movie, the characters are kind of thinly drawn. I don't think there's really any question about that. The book was not a literary work, especially the character of the mother. She's kind of hard to take. In the book, she's always wisecracking, and while her daughter is being possessed and then getting very hysterical. So I did manage to reread this again, and so 52 years later or so, I found it an astonishing page turner. I stayed up into the night to read it. I knew what the story was, and I still had to stay up in the night to finish it. But again, when I saw the film, the book seems so fast-paced, and the film is, up until the real possession starts, it's somewhat of a slog. And Friedkin himself admits that he wanted to be a movie that would slowly develop, and we had to get a feeling of a sort of authenticity to the fact that this could be a possession of a human being, and there is a devil. And this isn't something medical, because probably the first half of the film, we get to see Reagan, the 12-year-old girl played by Linda Blair, we get to see her being examined and given all kinds of tests to see what was actually wrong with her from a medical point of view. And we get these Iraqi scenes that open the film. They're also open the book. They're a bit murky as to where this possession comes, because the big question that the priests ask themselves is, why is the devil doing this, and why is the devil doing it to this 12-year-old girl? So we get, in this opening prologue, we get an idea that where Max von Sydow playing the older priest who had some experience with exorcism and used again in the finale of the film. It ties it together, and that he is facing a statue that represents the devil. But it's kind of murky as to did he unleash it in his he's an archaeologist, priest. So did he unleash this malevolent force, and then why would it have chosen this 12-year-old girl on the other side of the globe? And another question you have to ask yourself when you see it, especially in 1973, is why did the church, the Catholic Church, support this film? It is a story about good versus evil. It is a story about God versus the devil. But I mean, 10 years before, well, you probably couldn't have even made this film 10 years for sure, but the church would have condemned it. It condemned just for the language and putting the language in the mouth of a 12-year-old girl. But I remember reading one of the contemporaneous reviews that's saying that this is sort of like a advertisement for Catholicism. Evil exists. The church is necessary. There is a devil out there. And in 1973, the audiences were numb. and they wanted to be shook up out of their numbness. Numbness that brought on by all the events that I've enumerated in previous videos on the films in 1973. And, you know, the assassinations, the turmoil of the Vietnam War. In 1973, we're having a president who was being disgraced and would soon leave office. So it was a reaction against rationalism, a reaction against medical science. The mother herself is an unbeliever. It's explicitly made clear that she is a rationalist. She does not believe in any religion, and that medical science simply can't. Science itself can't explain everything. So we have these scenes, and as frightening as the possession scenes are, the scenes in the hospital, from some of the reviews I read and articles about it back in 1973, there is one procedure, arteriogram, where they stick a needle into Reagan's throat and blood spurts out because they're actually going into the carotid artery, something they don't do today. But nothing showed, nothing, all these tests, and they showed that Reagan's brain was normal. There was nothing. What could it be? So finally, the second half of the movie, we get the last resort. We go for exorcism. But then there too, we get, you know, there is no possession. Even in 1973, the Catholic Church didn't believe in it. But it had to meet certain requirements. Now in the book, we get what the history of demonic possession is. There's little bits and pieces scattered throughout the book. So William Peter Blatty really did his homework on this. So you get that feeling that it has happened before, but science has disproved it. But here we are seeing a mystery. Science isn't able to explain it all. So I still think in the book you had more of a sense of this community of people. The Ellen Burstyn character, who is a movie star and is in Washington. This is all set in Washington, D.C., in actually Georgetown, right next door to Georgetown University, a Jesuit university. And so as we go into the possession scenes, now I guess you could say all that really doesn't matter, even though William Friedkin and William Peter Blatty said this isn't a horror film. Obviously, this is a horror film. It's all about the special effects and how horrible this possession is as it constitutes itself within a 12-year-old girl. So the makeup artists here are fantastic. I mean, they really deliver. I mean, you know, even though I find this a distasteful movie, hats off to the people who did the makeup on this film. And not only on Linda Blair, but on Max von Sydow, who was not an old man at the time, but in the context of the film, he's playing an old man with a bad heart. And so he looks very sickly, and that was a great makeup job as well. And as thin as some of the characters were, and they're even thinner, I think, in the movie, because Lee J. Cobb's homicide detective, there's a lot more to his investigation to a mysterious death that may have occurred in Reagan's bedroom. And he's sort of like a Columbo character. I think Columbo had been on TV, maybe a couple TV movies before the series. But, you know, in the book, he's doing this, oh, and one more thing kind of dialogue and investigation. And so, but he's very, I mean, Lee J. Cobb is one of our greatest actors, so he pulls that off. But really, the movie really does center around Damien Karras, the young priest, played by Jason Miller. He is undergoing a crisis of faith, and he is not just a priest; he is a psychiatrist. He was a priest, and the Jesuits paid for his education. but he's had a crisis of faith. He's no longer comfortable with counseling other priests because of his own crisis, and then he added to this guilt about his mother, is very poor, lived in very poor circumstances in New York City, elderly mother, and then ends up in Bellevue. So, and in the book and in the movie, this is the optimal character, and Jason Miller was in fact nominated for Best Supporting Actor in the Oscars. I saw Jason Miller in a play. I don't know, it was around the year 2000, late 90s. It was of Inherit the Wind. I'll never forget it because it was a production that was staged in a courthouse in Philadelphia, the big Philadelphia courthouse, a big courtroom, and where much of the action of Inherit the Wind plays. And Jason Miller, despite these great reviews that he got for this film, really didn't go on to have a extensive film career making movies. He had his own theater company in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Regional Theater, and that was a production from there, was the one that was brought to Philadelphia. He also wrote That Championship Season, which won an Tony Award for Best Play a few years before The Exorcist. So the movie turned out to be a huge hit. I mean, there were lines all the way around the block. People were allegedly fainting, especially in the scenes in the hospital where Reagan is going under these tests, and they suppose, I don't know if it was publicity, but ambulances would be at certain theaters. People were overcome with nausea. So. And again, you have to remember, people had not seen anything like this in 1973. For horror fans today, I don't know, maybe it's ho-hum. I don't know. I find that hard to believe because these scenes are really, really quite horrible. And I also have to say that once we get to the exorcism, these scenes really work. I mean, the climax of this movie is terrific. It's a little bit different. It's less ambiguous than Blatty's climax in the book, in its explanation of possession. So on this, this is like I say, this has the extended director's cut. There is another edition that has the original theatrical cut as well. And there's rumors, I don't think it's finalized yet, but the rumors are that there's going to be a UHD to celebrate the 50th anniversary of The Exorcist coming out in September. Now the Friedkin commentary here is the second one he did for The Exorcist, and I guess it was around 2001. I'm assuming when the DVD of the extended director's cut came out. And it's a really odd commentary because he basically describes all the scenes of the film. Now we're doing this, and now we're doing this, and now it's almost as if Friedkin is talking to the actors and trying to get them set up for the scene that they're going to perform. He doesn't talk at all about the production history of how he chose these different actors, how Linda Blair was chosen. So that's kind of disappointing. But one good thing is, if you want to know more about the production history, the Exorcist page on Wikipedia is enormous, and it gives you all the production, all these kind of things that Friedkin did not put in his commentary. So overall, this is a movie that probably most of you are going to like a lot more than me, and I can understand that because it is a very, very unique film in film history, and despite what Blatty and Friedkin say, this is very much a landmark film in the history of horror cinema. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.